From fear to confidence, how to unlock your personal style and build a strong personal brand. This is the subject of a really special episode of Biz Bites because we look at the elements that are really going to help you stand out. Now, be that being on stage and being a keynote speaker or just being in front of a small group of people. You want to have the confidence to be able to be out there, but you also want the personal style to make sure you get that right. But you also want to consider what happens if you're presenting, but you're here in a online situation. Getting your background right, developing what is your personal style to show on there. We talk through all of those things and so much more. Some really practical tips. You don't want to miss this very special episode of Biz Bites with Nina Fountain. Well, hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Biz Bites. And today's guest, well, it's a little bit different for what we've talked about on the program before, but a really, really important aspect and idea for thought leaders to think about. And we've got lots of avenues to talk about through there. And Nina, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, as I always like to do, I'd love you to introduce yourself into the program and tell us a little bit about you and about what you do.
Sure. My name's Nina. I'm the executive stylist. I'm known as the executive stylist, and I'm also a management consultant. So I wear two hats, which means I know what it's like to be in the public eye, to give keynotes, to be on TV, and I know what it's like to be raising your visibility. So my clients are usually women who are looking to expand their influence through speaking, or they're going to be in front of the media more. They're stepping into the C-suite. They're thinking about how they can take that visual message and make it aligned with what they want to say to the world in that moment.
I think there's so much to unpack in all of this, and we're going to go through lots of different things. But I want to hit you up first, just with a question without notice. But what would you say is the number one reason that women object to, or put up a barrier, I suppose is a better term, to actually being the front person? And I think that probably extends beyond women, but I'm interested as to whether there's a difference between men and women as well.
Yes. Oh, it's such a good question, because the thing I hear in my mind is people saying, oh, it's someone else's role, or, oh, I couldn't do that because I'm not overly qualified, or I've never done it before. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable. And all of those, they're coming from different places and there's different reasons, but essentially it's a fear of standing out too much and doing something that might misalign them from the group. I think that's the main fear. Is it's a safe place to be when you're fitting in. You feel like you're not super visible, you're acceptable amongst your peers. And then when you stand out and you're visible and people are looking at you on stage for 40 minutes, or they are really aware of your image because you're public, then there's a fear piece that can kick in. Am I worth it? Do I belong? Am I looking the part? Is part of that whole fear. So yeah, I'd love it if I could boil it down to one thing, but I'm going to have to come back to you on that. So perhaps we could say the one thing is the fear.
And I think it's an interesting one. I mean, people often talk about the whole idea of the fear of public speaking. People would, that whole, that old joke that if it's a joke that they would rather be in the coffin than speaking at a funeral, which, I guess for me, that's always been a little bit bizarre because
you speak for a living, effectively.
Correct. Right. I don't go speak for a living, but I also worked in the funeral industry for 7 years, so I also know all about that side of things as well. So it really always seemed like a strange thing, but I totally understand. In saying that, I do totally understand that people have that fear of doing that, and it's not. And it's only when you realize that it's something that does come relatively easy to you that you realize sometimes that it's not so easy for other people. And I know I had an event that was organized recently that was very last minute. In fact, it was organized on the day. And I spent the day organizing it and organizing all the speakers, and I'd put my hand up to be the MC for the event. And
Wow.
we literally sat down in the event starting, and I went, I've been so busy focused on everyone else, I have no idea what I'm supposed to say. And so I had nothing scripted at all. I had the people's names. That was literally all I had.
Wow.
But it was actually, I actually got a buzz out of doing it.
It was
and,
fun
and
in the end. You turned it
it
into
was so
something
much
fun.
fun. Like I was just
Yeah.
going, I love that idea. And then people said to me, they loved what I said, but I couldn't completely recall everything that I'd said because
Yeah.
it was so spontaneous. But
Yeah.
I did recognize that, having watched other people MC events and things, that
Yeah.
it doesn't always come easily.
No, it doesn't. And I think back to my own journey of how do you get to the point where you are on stage and you feel comfortable? And I think there were two really key turning points for me. And one was that I think initially I had heard this fear of public speaking thing. And I remember when I was at school, my first public speaking.
We hope you're enjoying listening to the Biz Bites podcast. Have you ever thought about having your own podcast, one for your business, where your brilliance is exposed to the rest of the world? Well, come talk to us at Podcasts Done For You. That's what we're all about. We even offer a service where I'll anchor the program for you. So all you have to do is show up for a conversation. But don't worry about that. We will do everything to design a program that suits you, from the strategy right through to publishing and, of course, helping you share it. So come talk to us, podcastdoneforyou.com.au, details in the show notes below. Now, back to Biz Bites.
One was that I think initially I had heard this fear of public speaking thing. And I remember when I was at school, my first public speaking opportunity, at the age of 9 or 10, I was a bit scared and I didn't feel like my cards were adequate for the occasion. And I think I carried that through into other opportunities, because I never, as far as I can recall, up until probably my early 30s, didn't feel, okay, I really nailed that. I landed it. I feel really comfortable with what I said. And then someone told me that, someone pointed out that the experience you have when you're nervous, your body's response, the parasympathetic response of, perhaps a bit of increased temperature and some sweat and your palms go clammy, is exactly the same as when you are excited. And I realized that's so true. And that gives you an opportunity to reframe it and to say to yourself, maybe there's a bit of nerves, but I'm excited about this, and to look more at the excitement element rather than thinking this is just nerves. Look at me, I must be nervous. Instead, you have the opportunity to say, look at me, I must be excited. And that actually really helped me to flip my mindset and to become excited about it. And then I think the other turning point was when I decided to let go of my preparation and just turn up like you did for that event and go with it. And just at some point say, I've done my prep. Now it's time to be present. It's time to just be the show. Like, this is what people have come for. And I need all of my self and all of my mindset to be in this moment to be able to deliver on what they're expecting, and not to, be caught in my prep and in my thoughts. And did I say this and did I say that? So that's actually really turned things around for me as well, in terms of feeling comfortable, because there comes a point when you can't prepare anymore. You just have to kind of be there.
Yeah, I've one of the things that I participated in a couple of years ago. It was a talk by a guy called Todd Herman. I don't know if you've heard of Todd.
I don't know the name, no.
And he's written a book called The Alter Ego, and he's worked with a number of very high-profile celebrities and sports people. And it's this whole idea that, particularly, like, I think Beyonce is the most well-known, not necessarily that, I don't know that Beyonce was his client, but her idea was the most well-known, that she got a lot of stage fright. And so she invented this character called Sasha Fierce, and she was, for her purposes, Sasha Fierce when she went on stage, and not Beyonce. And I think she's since overcome all of that.
So interesting.
And so, but I find that kind of interesting, that idea, because it's a little bit, it's a little bit almost, it's not quite the opposite to what you're saying. It's about, on one respect, it's going, okay, I've got to pretend I'm somebody else. And I always found that a little bit challenging. Whereas the idea that you're talking about is really just being at one with yourself, but understanding that you can turn those emotions around and to think about it in a different way.
I think there's something. This is so interesting. This is fascinating. I really want to find out more about that now. And what it reminds me of, and I wonder if this is a concept that's somewhere between the two, is that concept of persona, which is the small aspects that people get to observe about you in a particular situation that you can manage for your own message, if you like. So you're, at any one point in time, if you only have a couple of contacts with people, you see very little about them. You don't fully get the three-dimensional version of them. You get the two-dimensional version. You get specific aspects. And, in marketing branding, we call that persona, because it's not the full personality. It's not all the complicated aspects. It's the aspects that will help serve that purpose. So I guess in a way, what we're doing when we're on stage or when we're speaking is being the persona, speaker or podcaster or leader, or it's really just one aspect of you. But it's when you do that to your fullest extent, when you serve in that moment by really stepping into that persona, that actually gives people what they need from that moment as well. It's kind of, I just wonder if persona could be another way to think about it.
It is very much
talking out loud. Thinking out.
Part of what Todd talks about as well, he gave us a personal example where when he walks into the office, he puts on his glasses. Now he actually doesn't need glasses. He just has a pair of glasses that then make him feel like, okay, this is work mode, which equally when he takes the glasses off and steps into the home, he's now in, dad mode. And so he's no longer at work. And I understand that there's certain triggers that you have in different environments. And I know certainly, for me, I know I make a point of getting changed. So I work from home.
Yeah, nice.
Studio from home, but
right.
the thing, and I've been doing that for a very long time, probably I think it's about 15 years now, and I've made it a point from the beginning of going, when I finish work, I get changed.
Yeah,
and it's
nice.
just because that way it triggers and goes, no, there's no inclination to go back into the office. And it's also kind of that different mindset. And I think I'm interested as well when you're going on stage, or you're in a situation where you're a thought leader and therefore you have to speak in front of people, whatever that looks like. Are there certain things that people should be thinking about as triggers to, lift themselves in a way that needs to project who they are and the circumstance?
Absolutely. And let's come back to what you said around the glasses and changing your outfit for work versus home, because there's some research done around that. It's really, really fascinating. And I think to your point around, if you're on stage, you're speaking, what are those triggers? What are the things that are going to enable you to step into that role and to deliver? And one of them is that sense of power, that sense of personal affirmation and strength, which a lot of people can get from clothing. And I talk about their style as the second skin of a superhero, that if you're wearing clothes that feel they're so connected with you and they're the best version of you, and you're absolutely looking the part and you absolutely feel amazing, you look at yourself and you're like, I look so good, that's incredibly empowering. And that is one of those triggers, if you like, that people use to feel fantastic in that moment and to know that they can deliver. And then I think there's other more personal things. When I was, it reminds me of when I was on live TV, live national TV. It was a 10-minute interview, and I wore a pair of shoes that I had purchased with the first payment from a consulting gig that was one of the best things I'd done in my career. And I bought them as a celebration of success and a celebration of that achievement. And it was really fun to wear those on set when I was being interviewed on live TV and just remember this is one of those, this is another great moment. This is another moment of what I've built in this business and my knowledge and what I can contribute. And so I think that that's the other thing, is that people sometimes have those personal reminders that are really meaningful of who they are and what they have to bring in that moment. Yeah, and so that's the answer. The triggers.
Yeah, and I love this as well. That connection as well between a successful business moment and something that you were carrying into a space where you were having to, embellish and talk more about that. It's a nice way of carrying that forward, and what an appropriate place to wear them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what you said about the glasses and then changing your clothes and that cueing in around the different contexts, there's some research done on, there's actually 600 research papers that talk about this concept of enclosed cognition, which is literally that the clothes we wear can affect our thinking style in terms of our productivity at focus or creativity. So that's what the studies were limited to, was, does this particular coat that person is wearing make them more productive, or does a coat that they're wearing make them more creative? And what was really interesting was that the coats were the same in the two groups. They were just told that it was different. One was told that they were wearing a doctor's coat, and the other group was told that they were wearing an artist's coat, a painter's coat. And the people in the painter's group were more creative. The people in the doctor's coat were more focused and more productive. So the meanings that we attach to the clothes that we wear, literally, they're not just conveniences. They actually go deeper in terms of affecting how our cognition works. They literally change your neuropsychology in a moment based on the meaning that you've associated it.
It's so true. I mean, I know, back many years ago, and I worked in a corporate environment, and so it was the full suit and tie thing.
Yeah.
And I always felt restricted creatively, that I just felt like, the suit and tie does not work with someone who's in a creative space, in the sort of marketing space that I was in. And I know when I started Com Together that it was like, right from day one, it's a jeans policy.
Nice.
And it was like, and I threw away all the ties. Funnily enough, I had to buy a suit recently for a different purpose outside of work. And I was wearing, and someone commented, "Nice tie." And I said, "It's the first time I put on a tie in 15 years."
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. So,
who am I? What am I in this moment? Yeah.
But it is interesting how those things can make a real difference to the way we think and the way we are in a moment. And I guess, how important is it in terms of getting, we focused on the idea of just putting something on that's associated, right? But in terms of the image that you project when you're in a position of leadership, because I think we've had this traditional thing where it's suit and tie and the equivalent thereof for a woman. But that's shifted in recent times, I've noticed. I think for me, the most bizarre thing was when COVID. So as I mentioned, I've worked from home for a long time. So being online and doing things online was not new to me. But I recognized when COVID came and we had lockdowns, that people started working online, and suddenly you went from having conversations with people who were wearing a suit and tie in the office. And now, just because they were at home, they were in like T-shirt and, kids running around and dogs everywhere and all that sort of stuff was happening.
Yeah.
And then it kind of, the barriers started coming up again when people started realizing it. But I think this blend of what people feel is the right thing and spending some time on the image that they project.
Yeah, it is really important. And I think it's one of those things where people may or may not have their own stories and other people's stories to draw on as they form their own impression around this. And I think it's also not simple in that each person's work context and their personality and what's important to them are going to be quite different. How that leader is and what they're needing to convey is going to change and shift across as many people as you have in the room. There's going to be different scenarios. So it means there isn't a great blanket rule. At the same time, I think what's happened is that we haven't had, because it's a subtle visual language that we're talking about, like manners or accent or color, for example. These are things that they're kind of there, they're part of the experience. You don't necessarily bring them to the surface and actually have a conversation about them. So there isn't a collective conversation about what's going on here. And it may be for that reason people aren't getting kind of shoulder tapped by their boss because they don't want to be seen as overstepping the mark. And it's like, how do we talk about this? How do we talk about this blurring of the lines? And my take on it is that what I'm seeing is a lot of people are, if you like, abdicating their right to manage their message by not looking the part, and that makes it hard for people to easily do business with them in whatever context they are. So, for example, I had someone through a video series communicate about how she could help me make $1 million through speaking. And meanwhile, she was dressed really shabbily, I've got to say. Sweatshirt, t-shirt, hair pulled back, no effort to her appearance at all. And also the setting was in her kitchen, where you could literally see the toaster as well as the thing that she was using to present. And you thought, if you don't respect this environment, then what respect do you have for this opportunity that you're presenting? And really, do you actually have the ability to help me make $1 million through speaking? Because I've just got questions now. And it's certainly not that I could get a clear answer. It's just the fact that it raises a question that puts blocks in people's way to want to do business. And I feel like that's the thing that a lot of people aren't realizing, but I get to hear the stories. And one of them was a lady who was a recruitment agent and had sent an executive along. The executive sails through, gets to the third interview, looks really professional in the first two, but the third one's online. The others had been in person, turns up wearing a t-shirt with a logo on it, and she's interviewing for an executive position. And she ended up getting the job, but the recruitment agent said that the company came back to her and said, what was with her outfit? And then the recruitment agent also said, you can guarantee that they reduced her salary because of how she presented in that last interview. And, all subtle, all behind doors, no one's going to talk about it, but these are the kinds of things that are happening when people don't make it easy for the door to open.
It's so fascinating. And I think it's, we've lived in such different times now. I mean, I remember, you talk about how people present themselves. It really wasn't that long ago that tattoos were not a thing that were particularly common.
Yeah.
And now, of course, we've got the full sleeves and things that people have. But I remember a time when people would actively cover it up. So if they had the sleeve, they would wear the long sleeve.
I was in that era. I remember those times. So.
Yeah. And I remember meeting someone and I'd known him for a number of years and seen him off and on. And I happened to see him one day, and I think he was wearing short sleeves or something. He was getting ready to leave work, whatever it was. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize, not that it was a big deal, but I had no idea.
Yeah.
And because he was actively covering it up, which you wouldn't do anymore. That's just not, but it's interesting how perceptions have changed. And I'm wondering as well, I remember hearing many years ago that, when you're presenting, particularly if you're doing it on camera, but presenting in general, don't wear a hat and don't wear glasses because it's putting a mask or a barrier between people. So, I happily do plenty of times when I don't have the hat on, but, I haven't got a lot of hair, so the hat adds a different layer. And quite frankly, I can take the glasses off, but I won't be able to see you very well.
Yes.
So, and I contacts have never been a good thing for me. So it is what it is. But I'm just interested as to whether that actually is a thing or that's just an old detail, and have we shifted, much like the tattoos, have we shifted in the way that we think?
Yeah, I love that. I think we have shifted, and for you, it's a creative. It comes across as creative, which is so in line with your brand, and that's, I think, where society as a whole has shifted. Is that we're much more pluralistic. We're much more every person is an individual, and every business is unique, and every situation is different. So we're much more tolerant of lots of different ways of doing things to look the part, or to be the person that you are. And at the same time, what hasn't changed is our really primal needs for people to do what they say they're going to do, to be the person that you think they are, to deliver when you ask them to do something. And these more basic kind of expectations of trust and consistency and belonging, even, these are all things that style speaks into. So it's kind of walking a fine line. People do need to walk a bit of a fine line there in terms of putting distance between you with glasses and with a hat. I think now there's so much more tolerance of like creativity, especially with someone like you. It's absolutely aligned with your brand and who you are. So it totally makes sense, it just makes sense.
Can you tell my mother that she hates the hat? By the rest of my family have no problem. But Mum, if you're watching, I'm sorry, I'm still wearing the hat.
And it looks great.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
But it is an interesting thing, though, about the question of how much time people spend thinking about their brand, because you spend a lot of time if you're in that situation where you're going to be speaking, and whether it is a keynote situation or whether it's just in front of your team or a small group, whatever that is, how much time do people actually spend thinking about their own personal brand and the way they're presenting themselves, and what that actually means? And again, whether there's a difference between the way men and women think in that regard.
And my answer to that is, you make one decision that makes all of the decisions for you. And really, when you do something like a styling experience with someone like me, where we're aligning brand and style, we're aligning that person's style with their personality so that it feels very connected to who they are, and they absolutely feel fantastic in it, then you've got your outfits together, you have your pictures on your phone. So in the morning, you can just check what's on your calendar, check what the weather is, and decide which outfit you're going to wear. It takes you a minute to choose what to wear, rather than having to, think about it every day. So I feel like, it's one of those things that falls into just get it done right at the beginning, and then have a clear direction. It's like that's the strategy, and then the implementation follows much more easily.
I love that. It's a very basic tips for people, isn't it? To think about it and to then literally have that and go, well, depending on the kind of people that you're talking to at that day or not talking to. I know I certainly have the odd day where I've got rather 0 meetings, or the meetings are just internals, so I don't have to wear a shirt. I can wear a polo shirt instead, for example. And those little things can make a bit of a difference as to how you think and how you want to be and show up during that day and what you're trying to get done.
Totally.
Because it's not just about presenting, it's about what you want to get done in that day.
It's absolutely about what you want to get done, and what kind of flow you want to be in, and whether you want to be productive. Like I'll have my creative days. Sometimes a Saturday is a creative day for me, where I know I'm not going to have any expectations to meet with people. And actually that's flipping more to be Monday now, because I'm working more in the US and people don't book meetings on Sunday their time. So I've got this whole day, and that's a day when I turn up in jeans, a t-shirt, and I'm still work focused, but I'm not as, I'm working, but I'm not as focused in that moment. I'm looking more for those creative ideas, that strategic thinking, the kind of information gathering is what I'll do on those days.
Now, before we move away from the visual brand elements, there's one thing that I wanted to point out to people that you and I discussed actually when we first met a little bit, and I just want to talk about the surrounds, because I think one of the things
Yeah.
that's important is that many people today are presenting online.
Mm.
So what you have in your background is also important. The tendency has been to opt for a virtual background for many people. Now, personally, I mean, I used it for a while, and I get it. Sometimes you're not in a situation where you can particularly tidy up what's behind you, and you think, well, do I really want to show all of this to the world? And
Mm.
you tend to think, oh well, I'll have a nice some kind of visual thing. Sometimes it shows a fake office or a fake setting. I prefer it when if you're going to use it, you see something where it's a bit more on brand. So you might have the logo in the corner and just some color in there. But even then, it's not as good as having something that's real. And
Mm.
it's actually surprisingly easy. And you've got a little secret behind you to make that look good. And it didn't take very much, did it?
It didn't take very much. And in fact, I can give you some insight. So this is it's a wooden divider, if you like. It's kind of a wooden fence. So this is the rest of my office over here. It's like there's my bookshelf, and the rest of my house is over there. So I won't show you too much. But for me, that works beautifully in that I'm in my workspace. I'm also not seeing everything else behind me. So I'm not distracted by my house. I can just be in my office and thinking and being focused here. And then, yeah, I think the other thing that makes it work is that it's not fake. And people feel like they're just focused on the person that's appearing in front of them. So yeah, I think like you've done a great job where you've given some hints of what you do with some words behind you. At the same time, it's not distracting. So there's an element of it feeling homely, like you've got some home elements, but they're also not dominating the whole scene, and the eye's not too distracted. And that's one thing I've seen. Like you and I could talk about this for so long, but I've seen people, they fill the back of their space with a whiskey bottle, a trophy, a picture of them on holidays, and you name it, there's all kinds of things there. And where's the mind going when where's that conversational partner's mind going? They're trying to work out what all those things are, because it looks like you've made them important to the conversation. You've brought them into the conversation. So now they're trying to add that to what they're thinking about with you, and kind of join the dots there. And I just don't think that that's smart business, to be honest.
No, and I think the point is as well that you can make it, what you've done is it doesn't cost very much.
Yeah.
It's very simple to get. It doesn't take up much space. You can easily fold it away when you're not in business mode or need the extra space for whatever reason. But when it comes to, okay, I've got to set things up, and rather than, and I've done the thing where I put a green screen on the back of the chair and try and cover those, and I've seen people do various versions of that. If you can do something like that, it's a much easier way of doing it and looking smart in the process, and actually centering the focus on the person rather than being distracted by, because I think that's what people forget, is that the virtual backgrounds are often very distracting.
Yeah, they are.
And you can see the movement. None of us keeps dead still. When we're talking, and we exaggerate it now, we move our heads and we move our arms and things. And how many times do you see that sort of visual barrier breaking around the person, and you go, well, that's a virtual background.
Yeah.
And it just distracts you from what you're talking about.
That's right. Another really important tip is what you are managing really well, which is lighting. And so here I have natural light, and I also have a light just to my left that helps to supplement that, so I'm not half in shadow. And I think people are not always thinking about their lighting, but it's important, especially if they are wearing glasses. So again, you've managed that like really nicely. There's no reflection on your glasses. And then, the other thing is that faces can easily be hidden. They're often a lot darker than they need to be. So the face doesn't show as the most important thing. And we've just got to get a few things right. This little square is how people are meeting us these days, right? So
Absolutely.
we've just kind of got to manage that image. It's more than
And
just a
it's not
square.
a big investment. I think that's the intriguing thing is
Yeah.
that, I know, for example, when I set this studio up, that yes, I've got a few lights that are sitting in the background, but that's just more for background lighting. But I've
Mm.
got one key light that is just in front of me there.
Yeah, nice.
And it was not a big investment. I think it
Yeah.
was $150, something
Yeah.
like that. And but it makes the world of difference,
The
because it
world of
also
difference.
means that what the camera is doing a lot less work in trying to compensate for different lighting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing to remember, is that
Mm.
the equipment that you've got, the camera, can
Mm.
only do so much.
And can I add one other thing? And I think, and you and I are kind of demonstrating how to do it, is that we talked before about what creates distance between people. One of the things that's creating distance is that people are not, so if, yeah, do we do it from the audience perspective or from the speaker's perspective? So what speakers are doing is they're not always revealing much of themselves because they're hiding at the bottom of the screen. And for whatever reason, it might be because they don't feel comfortable with what they're wearing on the day. That doesn't feel screen appropriate. But that means that like 2/3 of the real estate is just on the background. And this, the more someone can see, the more it feels like they're with you in person. Obviously they're not, but the more they can understand of you, the more information, the better, basically. So, and it just visually looks good to break it up into thirds. So to have the eyes at around 2/3 of the screen height. So there's no exact rule, but that's going to be a more visually appealing look. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
the
my,
amount of times, I mean, I think we've all been in these group Zooms, and you look around and you see people. And I was in I was actually a one-on-one meeting with someone today, and they were sort of, it was almost as if you can picture this, if I was standing up and he was in his lounge chair. And because
yeah,
there was that kind of a distance, he was lower down, he was sort of slouching back, and I can't even replicate that because the chair won't go lower here from
yeah,
the way I've got it set up. And I think these are things that people forget, that there are the visuals that you create are really important, because you don't, we talked about the hat and the glasses, but you don't want barriers that are between people being able to, relate to you, and
exactly.
to feel as though they're there. And I think one of the challenges is, and I remember a couple of years ago, and I know you're based in New Zealand, so I don't know whether you saw this story, but it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, that Carl Stefanovic, who hosts the Today Show in Australia,
Yeah.
wore the same suit for 12 months, every single day. Nobody noticed.
Wow.
Yet his co-host at the time was Lisa Wilkinson, who was getting criticized constantly if she would even consider wearing the same outfit 2 days in a row. And people were critical. Oh, you wore this didn't like this color, or didn't like this cut, or whatever it was. And nobody noticed at all what he was wearing. And he literally, nobody even in, I don't think anyone in the Today Show actually particularly noticed either. And he made a thing of it. He did it very deliberately. And it was only after 12 months that he, revealed it and
He said
said,
the game's up. I've been
the
wearing
game's
the
up.
same.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think it's fascinating, that, because one of the things that I've found in doing, podcasts for other people and having lots of guests come on my program, I'd have to say that I haven't done the exact statistics, but I would say for the majority of people that object to being on video are women.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a feeling that, I've got to do the hair and the makeup, and I've got to have the right
Mm.
clothes on and things.
Mm.
Men don't seem to care as much.
Mm.
But then I think we've also seen a little bit of a turn where there definitely is men putting more into their appearance, and maybe women being a little bit more relaxed as well. I'm not
Mm.
sure, but
Mm.
it is an interesting psyche that we don't seem to focus as much on the men visually as we do on.
Mm. Yeah, it's true. And men are more likely to say to me, look, I just don't care. Is there different colors of t-shirts? I didn't know, someone had someone tell me that.
It's white or black. That's it, isn't it? Is
That's
that is that
right.
the response for most of them?
But then the same person, interestingly, went on to say he runs 3-day events, that he wears blue on the first day, yellow on the second day, yellow on the last day, pink on the second day. So he actually, and he had reasons for doing that. So it was interesting in that it was kind of a foot in both camps, like realizing that fashion's not going to be a huge deal in the day, but also realizing it does communicate something, it does send a message. And yeah, I think there are genetic differences, social differences between the two, between men and women. On the research has been done on men and women, and and it comes down to things like color sensitivity, and like there's a fascinating piece of research done by NASA on the power of color, where they were looking at how could they use color to improve performance. And so they looked at the effects of color on men and women were much more affected by color, and it made a much bigger difference to their mood and to their the way they went about their day. So I think if we just look at men and women, that's the research that we've got. There does seem to be some pretty clear differences.
We're talking about backgrounds and things, and it reminds me of, certainly through a phase, I think it's probably through the 80s particularly, that if you looked at every newsroom, whatever country you're in, the background was a different shade of blue, because blue was seen as the kind of trusted colour. It's gravitated around. There's people who've introduced colour spots and things now, and you get black and you get blue and you get red and all sorts of different things. But so it's interesting that even that's moved. But I guess what I wanted to ask you, and we could talk for hours, but we've got to wrap up shortly. But I just wanted to ask you about this whole idea of your building your own brand, and you talked about before about, okay, you have a selection of photos, and depending on what you've got on in the day, but how do you actually work out that piece? How do you actually find what is going to be your brand and what is going to work for what you're trying to project and who you actually are as a personality? Because it doesn't always come easily to people.
It doesn't. So I've made a science of this, if you like. I think that's probably the best way of saying it. I've got an applied science degree, so I looked at style, and I'm an artist, so I've kind of brought the two together. And I looked at style through the lens of what really makes this work, specifically for me, because it was my own journey before I could help anyone else. And there are, so I've distilled it down to a few really useful tools. And one of those is understanding your style persona, your connection between your personality, specifically on how open-minded, how agreeable, how conscientious, and how extroverted you are. So there are connections there between those personality aspects and the type of fashion that you are going to feel fantastic in. And in terms of comfort and colors and structure and all of these things, and there's subtle cues to other people about who you are as well. Like, we know the difference between someone who's confidently carrying and looking amazing in a bold print suit to someone who's looking incredible and just as confident and just as amazing in like a sheer white silk outfit or something. Like, we know that there's different personalities behind those two different outfits. So I've kind of distilled all of that down into the style persona system. I'll include the link so people can get it as your gift with a code, and they can get it as a gift from us, and it'll be there as something they can get that direction. Once you get that direction, you're down to one of 12 personas, and that's for a lot of people, that's a really great level of clarity. You can go obviously a lot more individualized, and people who are very creative, who are very public, who are very aware of fashion will want to do that next level. And that's something, we look at style keywords, we look at influencers, we look at icons. We've got a whole mood board. There's a whole bunch of things we do there to develop their style even further from that. And then there's really two other key pieces, and that is, how do you dress your figure to look fantastic? So I call that my faultless figure body shape strategies. And that's where I've simplified all of those complex decisions around hemlines and necklines and shapes and silhouettes down to some really simple decisions. And then it's about your color alignment. So, for example, some people look terrible in orange and just shouldn't go near it. And others look terrible in black and it just absolutely washes them out. So how do you know that? It's about your skin tone, your hair tone, and your eye color. So once you have clarity around those colors, then you can really bring, even if you're doing a branding piece, like you're deciding what your logo should look like, the logo that you're going to be right next to, it's best if that's aligned with you because that whole thing looks coherent and there's a nice congruence there that doesn't jar the eye. So, so that's when you're getting really smart. But those are the essential pieces. A lot of stylists will look at the body shape piece, but they don't go into who are you as a person and what are you turning up to do? What's the value that you bring to a situation and how can we align that with you? So, yeah, I call that my purpose-led presence method because it's being present, connecting with that person's purpose, what they're here to do, and then the styling kind of comes from there.
I love all of that. And as you said, we're going to include lots of details in the show notes so people will be able to get a hold of all of that information. It's such an important area and one that we don't generally discuss all that much. So I've loved all of the tips and things that people will get from listening to this. Just to wrap things up, I always ask my guests this question: what's the aha moment that people have when they come to work with you that you wish more people knew they were going to have in advance?
Oh, thank you for that question. I actually find it quite moving to respond to it because what I find is that there's a huge amount of judgment. So you talked about those women not feeling comfortable on camera. There's the fashion world, thanks to magazines and high fashion and all of that incredible, creative, gorgeous stuff, also comes with some baggage around people feeling that they're less than and judgments that they're adopting on themselves. So they expect that a stylist is going to do the same. They often think I'm putting myself on the line here, and they're expecting some extreme makeover type experience where they'll be dressed down and told you shouldn't be wearing this, you shouldn't be wearing that, and comments on their body shape and things. And they're already being hard enough on themselves. Whereas in fact, the aha is that by stepping into who they are, giving themselves looks that feel fantastic, it's actually an act of self-care. It's actually an I'm worth it, and I'm going to feel fantastic, and I want to feel fantastic, and that's available to me, and I'm doing it. So that's where my clients get to before they start working with me, is they realize, it's not actually going to be a judgmental experience. It's going to be something where I feel like I've been affirmed, and it's a safe space, and it's actually a lot more fun. And this is why I sometimes have clients just look at me with a tear in their eye and say, thank you, because it's really unlocked a whole area of life that they previously had a lot of hang-ups about. Yeah.
Such an important thing, and I love that. It's a great way to end things, because I think it is such an important message, and to feel comfortable in who you are, and I think that extends to the brand that you're projecting in terms of feeling comfortable. What we talked about right in the beginning, where we talked about fear, and I think that if you're comfortable in not just how you present yourself, but you're comfortable in your stories and your expertise, then that fear will disappear, and you can turn it around, as you said, and have fun with it, and turn the thing around. So fantastic insights. Thank you so much for being part of the Biz Bites program.
Such a pleasure. Thanks, Anthony.
And again, we'll remind everyone that all the information on how to get in touch with Nina and to download some of her material will be in the show notes. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to your company next time on Biz Bites. Hey, thanks for listening to Biz Bites. We hope you enjoyed the program. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Biz Bites is proudly brought to you by Podcasts Done For You, the service where we will deliver a podcast for you and expose your brilliance to the world. Contact us today for more information. Details in the show notes. We look forward to your company next time on Biz Bites.